The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I'm going to need us as a collective community of critical thinkers to think very carefully about what I am about to report to you, and it relates to an interview that Donald Trump gave to Reuters yesterday. And in this interview, Donald Trump said that he's worried that what he says to Robert Mueller, if he agrees to be interviewed by Robert Mueller or his investigators as part of this Trump-Russia investigation, Trump believes that what he says to Mueller would be used to bring perjury charges against him in that investigation. Now, let's look at the wording that Donald Trump used in the interview when he said this, because this is sort of the foundation upon which our analysis will be built. Trump said, quote, yesterday, "So if I say something and he, Comey, says something else, and it's my word against his, and he's best friends with Mueller, so Mueller might say, well, I believe Comey. And even if I'm telling the truth, that makes me a liar. That's no good." So the easy reading of this is, hey, if you don't want to be charged with perjury, don't lie to investigators, federal agents, period. The argument that Trump and his lawyers are making and have been making is that Donald Trump's statements will be unfairly used to charge him with perjury, merely at the discovery of any discrepancy with what another witness has said, Trump will be unfairly charged with perjury. So there's two really important elements to analyze here. One is this concept of a perjury trap, and then the other is that Trump is effectively pleading the fifth here. I want to talk more about perjury trap because this is the misinformation around it has gotten so ridiculous that we've got to pick it apart. But let's start with the pleading the fifth thing here. Donald Trump is not literally pleading the fifth, which lets you not testify against yourself in order to avoid self-incrimination. But what Trump is doing is effectively, it's like a de facto pleading the fifth. Trump is worried that his statements will be self-incriminating, fairly or unfairly. Trump would say unfairly. So Trump is considering not giving statements to Robert Mueller. Now, Trump has said time and again that innocent people don't plead the fifth. Remember this as just one example?
Here's people taking the Fifth Amendment. 4 people plus the guy who illegally did the server. You know, he put in the illegal server. So there are 5 people taking the Fifth Amendment, like you see on the mob, right? You see the mob takes the Fifth. If you're innocent, why are you taking the Fifth Amendment?
Yeah, so there are many of these. I won't play them all. I won't show you all the tweets. It's been applied to Hillary Clinton, to staffers, to people in Trump's business past, all sorts of people that Trump has said, if you're innocent, you don't plead the fifth. So Trump, once again, if you aren't guilty, when law enforcement wants to talk to you, you talk to them, and Trump is violating his own standard here. But the reason why he would say he's violating it is because here there is this unfair desire to set a perjury trap against Trump. Let's break this down. First of all, what is perjury? Perjury is when you willfully tell an untruth in a court or investigation under oath. This can include to a grand jury. This can include to investigators. Perjury is the willful telling of untruths. You're not going to be charged with perjury if your comments, because of lack of recollection or lack of specificity or lack of detail, simply don't align with what another witness said, because perjury is the willful telling of lies, and perjury convictions are difficult to get because it's tough to figure out, legally speaking, or to prove legally speaking, that someone was willfully telling lies. So Trump's framing that any accidental or coincidental inaccuracies or conflicts with what, for example, James Comey has told Robert Mueller will get him charged with perjury are ridiculous at their face, because perjury convictions are really difficult to get, and prosecutors aren't going to just willy-nilly try to get soft perjury charges in this way. But the most important part of this is not the definition of perjury, which again means the willful telling of untruths. A perjury trap is a real thing, but it's prosecutorial misconduct. Prosecutors get in trouble for setting perjury traps, even though it happens incredibly rarely. And there is a definition for what it means to set a perjury trap. A perjury trap is when you call a witness in to testify without any real suspicion that the person has already committed crimes, solely with the intent of getting them to lie under oath to make that the one and only crime that you charge them with. Perjury traps almost never happen at the federal level. And in fact, no U.S. federal court has ever accepted a motion to dismiss because of claimed perjury traps, period, okay? We already know that Mueller's team has been talking to everybody from Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, to White House lawyer Don McGahn, to everybody in between about actions taken by Trump that might constitute obstruction of justice. By definition, that already means the perjury trap accusation would be bogus. If Trump perjures himself, it is not a trap set without any reason to think Trump may have already committed other crimes. Trump is part of this because he may have committed other crimes. Perjury traps are when you have nothing on somebody and you want to get them to perjure themselves. It simply doesn't apply here.
Yeah, it is bogus, but it's what the Trump lawyers have to go with. This has to be their strategy because Trump is a pathological liar. I mean, he just speaks that way. He speaks in hyperbole. So there's no way he could go into an interview with Robert Mueller and not come out of it having told 10 plus lies.
And it's not even the hyperbole. It's that he thinks he's smarter than everybody else, and they won't be able to figure out whether he's lying. And unfortunately, even though I'm telling you don't fall for the perjury trap nonsense, and there are some other journalists telling you don't fall for the perjury trap nonsense, Rudy Giuliani is doing a really good job of spreading the nonsense, and people are starting to buy it. They are starting to believe that a perjury trap is being set for Donald Trump here when it literally does not apply to the circumstances. By the way, also notable, Trump said in the same interview with Reuters that if he wanted to, he could take over the Mueller investigation, but he's choosing not to. Trump said, quote, "I can go in and I could do whatever. I could run it if I want, but I decided to stay out. I'm totally allowed to be involved if I wanted to be. So far, I haven't chosen to be involved. I'll stay out." Legally, I mean, who knows if that's the case. I'm worn out from the perjury trap debunking that I don't even have the energy to get into that part now.
He wants the Russian officials to also investigate their own meddling. So
Yeah.
we could have Trump and the Russians investigate Trump-Russia. That'd be great.
Putin made an incredible offer, which is that Trump can partner with Russians and they together can investigate, I guess, themselves, because they are the ones at this point suspected of the wrongdoing. Okay, yesterday I told you about this book which claims that Donald Trump is a mafia-owned Russian asset. The book is called House of Trump, House of Putin, The Untold Story of Donald Trump and the Russian Mafia. It's by investigative journalist Craig Unger. And one claim made in the book, among many, is that Unger said to Newsweek during an interview about the book that he has reason to believe there's a Russian asset in the White House who Unger believes is an actual Russian agent, but that part is not 100% clear. But at minimum, that there is a Russian asset working at the White House that is tied to Russian intelligence. I don't know if the story I'm about to tell you is related to Craig Unger's book or not. It's not clear whether this is the person that Unger was thinking about or talking about. But Democrats in the House of Representatives are now investigating National Security Advisor John Bolton's ties to the same suspected Russian spy, Maria Butina, who was recently indicted. And this is just a stunning convergence of multiple angles of the fiasco that is the Trump administration. And I'm going to do my best to break it down for you because it's starting to get very convoluted. We've got part A, which is Craig Unger's claim that there's a Russian asset working at the White House. Part B, from a few weeks ago, is that Maria Butina was indicted for being an unregistered foreign agent and for conspiracy to act. She is believed to be an agent of the Russian government working in the United States on Russia's behalf without properly disclosing it. We learned that Butina got access not only to high-level executives at the National Rifle Association, which has been a possible and likely conduit of Russian money to the Trump campaign. Butina also got access to officials at the Federal Reserve. Butina got access to officials at the Treasury Department and to at least one congressman that we know about, our friend, Congressman Russia, as I know him, Dana Rohrabacher, a Republican from California. What we now have are Democratic congressmen Elijah Cummings and Stephen Lynch, who want documents from Chief of Staff John Kelly related to whether John Bolton reported his previous work with this alleged Russian spy on his security clearance forms or on other White House vetting materials. It's suspected that the current national security advisor to the President of the United States, John Bolton, Trump's third NSA, by the way, is tied directly to suspected Russian spy Maria Butina through a video that Bolton participated in for a Butina-organized gun rights roundtable promoting gun rights in Russia. This actually was reported months ago by NPR. This was in March of 2018. At the time, Bolton wasn't yet the national security advisor. He became national security advisor in April, and the details reported by NPR did not get as much attention as they probably should have. And what we now know is that in 2013, John Bolton participated in a roundtable discussion organized by the same Maria Butina who has been indicted. And what Democrats are asking for are documents related to whether Bolton discussed the contacts that he no doubt had with someone, presumably Butina, if not others involved in that group, when he was invited and agreed to participate in this Russian gun rights thing, which, by the way, who even gets involved in advocating for Russian gun rights? I guess the NRA wants it because it helps them sell more guns for their clients. I don't know. But every time you shake a tree, as I saw written on Reddit yesterday, a Russian drops out of it. And what is the explanation going to be? My guess is, if you ask me, do I think that Bolton put anything about the work he did with this Russian gun rights group and his contacts potentially with Butina herself on his SF-86 form? My guess is, like Jared Kushner, he forgot to include that on the form.
Yeah, I mean, in response, they'll just deny everything here, and I think they can get away with that, especially because even I'm skeptical about this connection, in a way because John Bolton is a neocon, and his words and actions haven't exactly been pro-Russia throughout the years.
Sure.
Like, he supports regime change in Syria, which, of course, Putin and Bashar al-Assad are aligned. He also said that the 2016 election meddling was an act of war and that the U.S. negotiates with Russia at its peril. So I'm going to hold out judgment for now.
Well, then, if there's no reason to hide these contacts, I'm sure that they are on his SF-86 form, right?
Yeah, I'd love to see that SF-86 form, yep.
I think they're probably not on there. And this is, listen, this is just Trump's national security advisor. He mostly gets coffee and makes dinner reservations for people on Trump's staff. This is not like oh, wait a second, it's the national security advisor. Yeah, that's pretty serious. So let's get those records, but I don't think anybody will be surprised if the SF-86 form is missing any reference to this organization or to Maria Butina or whoever his contact was. And what I want to remind you of, it's now going to have to become a daily reminder. Pat's furious with me that I'm doing this, but it has to be a daily reminder. Nothing will happen unless Republicans lose control on November 6, 2018, period. Let's make it happen. Let me know on Twitter what you think about this. I'm on Twitter at @DPacman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show is independent progressive media, and it's mostly funded by great people in our audience through the membership program. Today, two of those great people are our new member of the day, Robert Raining, and sustaining member of the day, Rick Cook, who's been with us since 2013. Robert, Rick, thank you. Join them. Vote with your dollars for media you support at www.joinpakman.com. Coupon code is available if you want the discount. There's no vetting, okay? It's not means tested. If you want the discount, you can get 40% off with the coupon code VOTESOON18. If you don't want the discount, then by all means pay full price, and we appreciate everybody, regardless of how much they pay.
David, we can't keep giving out these discounts. I was looking at the numbers.
Yeah.
It's unsustainable.
Pat's concerned. He made a frantic 3 a.m. phone call, not to Michael Flynn, but to our attorney. To our accountant,
yes,
and notified him about all these discounts that are flying out the door. No, take the discount. By all means, I welcome people who take the discount. I have been very critical of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez when she doesn't know stuff or when she says things that don't make sense. And I've actually been so critical of her that people in the audience have written to me and they said, David, you're not being fair to her. Even if she's not an expert on every issue, she has the right ideas and we should support her because she will learn by doing. So my point in prefacing this story with that is to remind you that I am by no means an irrational knee-jerk defender of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. If anything, I'm the opposite. I've been critical where I feel she deserves criticism. She is now being slammed completely unfairly, as some articles have put it, for, quote, banning the press from her events. The truth is that what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did is hold some town halls in New York that were open to the public, but media was not allowed in. This is part of a listening tour that she did in the Bronx and Queens. That's where she's running. And she's being slammed for banning the press. She's being completely pillaged for lack of transparency. And these criticisms, I hate to break it to you, are completely ridiculous and absolutely fabricated. Her response on Twitter to this controversy was to say that, quote, our community is 50% immigrant. Folks are victims of domestic violence, trafficking, and have personal medical issues. This town hall was designed for residents to feel safe discussing sensitive issues in a threatening political time. We indicated previously that it would be closed to press. This is a stupid reason to criticize her. If you want to go after Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez because she said silly things about the unemployment rate, go ahead and do it. If you want to critique her because she seems confused about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if that's what you believe, then go ahead and critique her for that. If you want to even debate the merits of a listening tour, have that debate, okay? I have no problem with that. Even if you want to debate whether closing events to press is a good or bad idea as a campaign strategy, have that conversation. But having events that are closed to the press is just not a story. And you devalue your criticisms when you say that this is tantamount to banning the press or in any way censorship. And it is these angry, irate people who are crying wolf. Every single member of Congress, I think everyone, if not almost everyone, has private fundraising events. There is no press scrutiny other than general scrutiny of, we would like to know what it is that they are saying to donors behind closed doors. And of course, I also would like to know. This is a town hall for constituents, and the press is simply not guaranteed access to everything Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez does. Criticize her where it matters, where it makes sense, but this is simply dumb. And, you know, if you're outraged that a candidate met with a donor in private, okay, well, let's talk about that. If you're outraged that an elected official gave a private speech somewhere, let's talk about that. But this was not a press conference, and this is not even a defense of her policies or her ideas. This is merely saying this is a completely manufactured scandal. You don't have to allow press into everything you do, and it's perfectly reasonable to meet with would-be or actual constituents without media in there. And it is a devaluing of the criticisms of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to go after her for this.
Yeah, I mean, if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez never allowed the media into her speaking engagements, then maybe we'd have something approaching a scandal, or if she allowed MSNBC and Mother Jones into the room, but, you know, not Fox News and Breitbart, okay, we could have that conversation. We're not approaching any of this stuff.
There's just nothing here. There's nothing here, and it is a total joke to see people on the right, but also even some on the left, fall for criticizing her about this. And there are plenty of things about which Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez should be criticized, and I've criticized her for some of those, but the fact that sometimes she meets with constituents or would-be constituents without the media there is simply not a story. I have a completely surreal piece of video to play for you. Our fearless orange leader, Donald Trump, did an event at the White House yesterday to honor some officials that are in Border Patrol, immigration, customs officials who did great things. And at a certain point during this event, Donald Trump brings an officer on stage who is apparently Hispanic and mentions in his invite for the officer to come on stage that the officer, quote, speaks perfect English. Why is this even a topic of discussion? Well, we'll talk about that. Here's the video and audio from Donald Trump.
Adrian, come here. I want to ask you a question. So, how did you come here? You're not nervous, right? Speaks perfect English. Come here. I want to ask you about that. 78 lives. You saved 78 people. So how did you feel that there were people in that trailer?
So remember, Trump is the least racist person, period, as he has stated many times. We later found out that the officer in question is Adrian Anzaldúa, And Trump was just stunned, apparently, not only that Adrian spoke perfect English, but that he wasn't drinking a Corona and wearing a sombrero and playing in a mariachi band during his off time. This is... I'm sort of like perplexed here as to how this is even considered a reasonable thing to say. Obviously, Trump wouldn't note that a white guy speaks perfect English, but he notes that a Hispanic guy speaks perfect English. And I guess the one reason perfect English should be notable to Trump is that Trump speaks far from perfect English. But again, that should be notable about everybody, not just the Hispanic guy. So this is old-fashioned stereotyping and prejudice, period. I don't even know that we need like a serious, deep analysis of the thing. It's like calling a black guy so articulate in a context where there's no particular reason where we would question how articulate a black guy or anybody is. And when you're talking to a Hispanic American, I guess if they look Hispanic, it becomes notable if they speak good English to Donald Trump. It's just that simple.
I feel like we don't even have to provide commentary on this story. Like, we could have just played that 17-second video and that could have been the end of the story.
Mexico is sending rapists, it's sending criminals, and some I assume are good people, and I guess here happens to be one of them, even though we don't actually know whether Adrian Azaldo is from Mexico. I actually don't even know whether he's a naturalized citizen. He may have been born in the United States, for all I know. Could be either way. Plenty of Border Patrol agents who are both naturalized American citizens and Hispanic Americans who were born in the United States. Could be either.
You should hear his words. He has the best words, the best language, best vocabulary. Great guy.
I had a situation yesterday. I have the opposite problem that Adrian has with Donald Trump, which is because I am very, very white, as some of you may have noticed, but I am a Hispanic American in a sense. I'm a Hispanic immigrant from Argentina who learned English as a second language. I had an appointment at a bank to have something notarized yesterday, and the notary was Hispanic, and I believe from Puerto Rico. And she was taken aback. She was speaking Spanish to another customer when I arrived, so I just spoke to her in Spanish. And she said, "That is really good. How did you learn that?" And I said, "No, the question's how did I learn English? I'm from Argentina." And she was stunned. And I kind of love those. I admit, my girlfriend was saying to me, "You seem to really relish when that happens." And I said, "I do. I really do like it."
Everyone's using stereotypes to some degree, and she wouldn't necessarily know that you speak Spanish. She would probably assume that you learned it as a second language. And it's a fair assumption, I guess, in that case.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, you would think that she would be able to tell that I'm not an Spanish as a second language speaker if you're a native Spanish speaker.
Because of the accent.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, it was. I had a great time, and it was a beautiful afternoon that I had yesterday. So as far as the Trump video, I don't think I really have to say too much else. Here's where I think we can most productively take the story. If you're sick of headlines like these, Trump ridicules disabled reporter, Trump finds it notable that a Hispanic American speaks perfect English, Trump ruins another geopolitical alliance. If you're sick of it, register to vote in November. Go to vote.gov. If you think you're registered, confirm that by going to headcount.org. If you want to help Democrats defeat Republicans in November, go to my.democrats.org. Nearly 40% of Americans support this stuff. Many of them even like this stuff, and we've got to vote them all out. If you are not following The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show, you literally don't know what you're missing because you're not following us on Instagram. Please do go to Instagram.com/David Pakman Show or search for David Pakman Show on Instagram. You can also follow me. I am David.Pakman on Instagram. Quick break. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Ken Jennings, who holds the record for consecutive Jeopardy wins at 74 games. He's earned over $4 million on game shows and is now an author whose latest book is called Planet Funny: How Comedy Took Over Our Culture. Ken, I have so many things to ask you about, different things, and it's just really great to talk to you. So thank you for taking the time.
That's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with a little bit of Jeopardy stuff. So just let's get see if we can clarify some of the very common misperceptions that people might have about how the game works. You are not liable to be asked about literally anything on a particular episode. The guests, the contestants have a sense of the topics that will be part of a particular show. Is that correct?
That is a very common misconception for some reason. I have no idea why people think that, but I think vast swaths of America assume that the contestants know what the categories are going to be on Jeopardy on a given night. And that's not true. The contestants don't see those categories until the same time the home viewers do. And Alex says, let's see what the categories are. Nuclear physics, gangster rap. And that's the first time we've seen them.
Now, have you gotten any study material, even without having a delineation of the categories? Or do you get nothing? It's just show up and whatever's in your head is what you're going to have to go on.
Absolutely nothing. I mean, if you've been watching the show for 35 years, like many people have, you have some sense of the kinds of things Jeopardy will ask, the style of the questions. You know, there's going to be presidents and world capitals. There's kind of a canon. But no, you have no idea going in on that day whether it's going to be hockey or country music or the Franco-Prussian War.
Okay, how much of success on the game show depends on, one, the facts you have in your head, versus two, the right timing for when you buzz in?
I mean, you can't win without both. Somebody without the facts has zero chance to win. But the thing is, the show has a very tough audition process. Like, everybody there had to pass a very difficult simulation of a Jeopardy game. So on any given night, all three of the players, and most of the players know most of the answers most of the time. And because of that, it really does come down to, in practice, it turns out to be like 80-20 buzzer, because everybody knows all the answers and it's just who can get in first.
And is there a downside to, so I guess what is the secret to the buzzer timing? Because you can't buzz in too early either, right?
Right. Often on the show, you'll see somebody just wailing away on their buzzer, and you think, oh, that poor guy, his thing's not working. The fix is in. Do they not like Canadians? What's going on? And in fact, what happens is you can't just buzz whenever you know it. You have to wait for Alex to finish reading the question or the clue. And then at that point, some assistant somewhere flips a switch and activates all the buzzers. And then your buzzer's live. If you buzz in before that point, you actually get locked out for a fraction of a second. So when you see somebody doing this, what you're seeing is somebody who got so adrenalined up, they buzzed too early. You have to be in this very zen state where you hear Alex's voice die away, you wait like a brief syllable length pause, and then you just jam your thumb on that thing as if your life depended on it.
Okay, so as the wins start racking up, and I don't remember exactly how old I was when this was going on, but I do remember it. As the wins start racking up, what is the first sign, or are there signs that the producers are starting to say, you know, this we never really accounted for a streak that was this long. This maybe isn't how the game is designed to go. And then part two of the question is there a point at which the streak takes on a life of its own and then it becomes a really great thing for the show?
That's exactly what happened. This was a very recent rule change. About a year after I auditioned, when they called me to say, hey, we have a slot in 3 weeks, they said, oh, hey, we've got this new rule change. Contestants are no longer going to get retired forcibly after 5 games. It used to be kind of a Logan's Run thing where you won 5 games, they gave you a car, and the next night they had all new people.
Right.
And I was like, oh, well, thanks for letting me know, but that is very unlikely to affect me. And sure enough, that's what happened. The change just happened a few months ago. I'm sure they kind of wanted the excitement of a long streak, but maybe they were thinking 7 or 9 games was a long streak. I don't think they were planning on 6 months. And the contestants you don't get to chat with the producers. There's very strict security, because of the laws on the federal books about rigging game shows. You don't get any FaceTime with anybody who might know the answers. Not Alex, not the producers, nobody who actually runs the show. So there were a few conference calls where they wanted me to do publicity where I could tell they were a little nervous, and I've since heard retroactively, yes, behind the scenes, they were terrified. What if I had just broken Jeopardy after 30 years? And at one point on one of these calls, I asked, at what point do you just forcibly retire me? At what point does Alex say, all right, Ken, we've decided you've been on long enough? And there's a long pause and they say, our rules say a contestant plays till he or she loses.
Right.
And they had 48, I think, shows of me in the can before any of them started to air. So they've got months of me, and they have no way of knowing if people are going to hate it or like it.
Right.
And when they finally started to air, it did kind of organically turn into a thing. Jeopardy didn't promote it, but people just started saying, hey, this guy's been on for like 2 weeks. You got to watch this. And then SportsCenter started covering it, and it turned into a thing, and it turned out to be very good for their ratings, but they didn't know that going in.
Now, if they were determined to get you off the show, there are probably ways that they could do it that wouldn't violate sort of the structure or the rules, right? Like maybe, I don't know, really figuring out what you're unlikely to know much about and stacking those categories. Or I'm just imagining being a producer, like if they said, we've got to get this guy off, there's probably ways they could do it without breaking the rules or the law.
So they have, as long as they follow the guidelines that they've given to all contestants, and that they generally follow, they can pretty much do what they want. That's what their independent. There's like an agency that will monitor stuff for them, and that's what they'll get told. Just follow your guidelines and don't do anything specific to any one contestant. But in their case, their practice was to select all the material blindly and randomly. So it actually would have violated their own practices.
Interesting.
To give like anti-Ken questions, whatever those are. And but there were a few things they could do, and they were smart changes they made to level the playing field. They came back from hiatus, and they had changed their daily schedule of contestant warm-ups so that the new contestants, the challengers, got much more time to practice on the stage with the buzzer. The rehearsals were much more similar to the actual show.
Interesting.
And at that point, the games did get a lot closer, and I felt very proud of that. It was like they had, it was like widening the lane in the NBA for Wilt Chamberlain or whatever. They had to change the rules for me.
That is fascinating. So now I guess we can start getting into what you're doing now, and I think a good lead into that will be, correct me if I'm wrong, but the perception I had of how you started to be sort of caricatured in media that reported on the streak was as this sort of very wholesome character, and I don't know if that was on the basis like of religion or your physical appearance or your demeanor or what. Do you agree that that's kind of like the character that was built up about you, independently of like whether it's accurate or not? Was that sort of the Ken Jennings of the media?
Yeah, I think so. I'm kind of an Opie-looking guy. I was a Mormon guy I'm a Mormon guy who was living in Salt Lake City, Utah at the time. And for one thing, everybody on Jeopardy generally seems kind of bland and milquetoast. You can't really, there's no way to create a caricature of someone based on their Jeopardy appearances, because most people the format does not lend itself to any kind of showboating or character work. So yeah, insofar as people were writing about me, they were saying, this wholesome guy from Utah. But I actually was like a suburban dad from deeply Mormon Utah. That was not too far off.
So then I saw that when you have a Twitter account now. I don't know when it started, but you have a Twitter account, and you also write. And on the Twitter account, you sometimes do make political statements or make comments about politics. And it seems like when I look at the comments, people are like extra put off in a sense if it seems like their politics don't align with yours. And I don't know why. Like, is the idea that because you were on Jeopardy and they saw you as this very sort of narrow question answering guy, that it's not okay all of a sudden for you to have political opinions? Or like, are you surprised by some of the feedback you get when you make political posts on Twitter?
I mean, well, that's just part of Twitter, is you'll have athletes or comedians or whatever who are like, we shouldn't be separating kids from their parents. And, every conservative will be like, stick to comedy or stick to baseball or whatever. That's just the phenomenon of public life. You should have no opinions once you decide to play baseball or whatever. And it's probably intensified in my case just because Jeopardy's audience trends old, I think.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of baby boomers. You'd have a lot of kind of graying America, including a lot of red state Americans watching the show. And I'm sure some of them are like, he seemed so nice when he was on Jeopardy with Alex, but now look what he's saying about our president, So I think there is some of that.
So let's talk a little bit about comedy, because your book, Planet Funny, How Comedy Took Over Our Culture, makes a lot of very interesting analyses of what's going on within the comedy world. And I feel like lately, especially, comedy has become such a way to satirize politics. And sometimes it's almost become, comedy writers have had a pretty tough job lately, because even their wildest and wackiest ideas don't actually seem that much further than what we're experiencing in the real world. What's your sense of the way in which comedy and satire has worked its way even into sort of the most serious elements of society. Is that a good thing, or is that something that can make serious issues seem not serious?
Satire is very old. The plays of Aristophanes thousands of years ago are full of satire. It's certainly not a new idea to make jokes about the government. And we're not even in the first age where people were like, whoa, satire is dead. Things are too crazy. You can find quotes of people. Tom Lehrer said that about Watergate in Vietnam, that you can't be a satirist in the era of Watergate in Vietnam. This stuff's too crazy. And I remember Conan O'Brien saying that at the height of the Bill Clinton Kenneth Starr affair, like, there's sex jokes on page one. How do we do comedy now? And what is unprecedented now is, I think, kind of the blurring of the line between politics, between actual policy and current events, and what the comedians are saying. You have a generation of kids getting their news from comedy shows, and that has some unintended consequences, actually. There's some research showing that, Jon Stewart fans who got their news from The Daily Show, I think he was a passionate man trying to inspire people to take a point of view and point out problems in the world using humor. And instead what happened is he made a generation of kids pretty cynical. People who watched that show were very convinced that the media and politics were broken, and their response from it was to disengage. It did not help voting rates. It did not help political activism.
I mean, I guess the one thing it did do is they were quite informed. In other words, there were a number of interesting polls which showed that they did seem to be closely aligned with the facts to a greater degree than somebody who was primarily consuming actual serious news. You're bringing up sort of the second layer effect, which is, well, what did they do with that information? And sadly, the voting rates of that demographic are not impressively high, as you're pointing out.
Yeah, it just seems like today, when there's such an abundance of satire, we can see that it's kind of impotent, We see a hilarious joke about Trump online, or, some epic John Oliver takedown, and we're like, yeah, I'm going to retweet this. I've done my part. And it turns out that actually does nothing. Activism might work, voting might work, but really satire often is a way for people to kind of blow off steam and feel like they've helped, which actually benefits those in power. It becomes a steam vent that avoids actual pressure building up.
I'm curious what you think about, I'm trying to figure out the right way to set this up, but there's certainly, like right now we're in the middle of this N-word controversy with Omarosa and so on and so forth. The use of the N-word as an example for us is seen very differently if it is satirical versus not satirical. And there are very divergent views about that. And even in satire, can anybody use the word, or can only some people use the word? What's your sense more generally about the idea that discriminatory, offensive, or prejudicial things that would not be acceptable outside of satire become acceptable merely by calling them comedy? Like, is that a good thing? Is it problematic in some ways?
I think we used to give comedians a pretty wide carve out. They were kind of a special protected class. We needed our court jesters. And so it pretty much was a get out of jail card to be like, oh, that was just a joke.
Right.
So you'd have comedians make iffy jokes about race or class or war or whatever, taboo topics. And they could say, oh, that's just a joke. And I'm kind of glad we've reached the end of that, because it's kind of a cop out, right? I mean, of course it's a joke, but it's an utterance. It's out there in the air like any other. It affects listeners like any other. And I think it's fair to ask follow-up questions like, okay, Roseanne, you said you were joking, but what does that mean to compare an African-American woman to an ape? Like, what did you think the consequences of that are? What might the real-world implications of that be? Because this is another area where there's good research. If you give a set of subjects discriminatory jokes, disparagement humor, they call it, and then you compare it to people who received non-disparagement humor, light, banal jokes, and a third group that received discriminatory material that was not in humor form, the first group gets affected the most. That's the thing that will affect behavior. Something about humor, couching a difficult idea or controversial idea within a joke, allows it to seep into our brains and maybe subconsciously affect the way we act. People who listen to that material is more likely to react in a discriminatory way when given follow-up tasks. So I think it's not a joke at all, and I'm glad, I don't want to say it's the thought police now, because there is no such thing, but I'm glad we're examining jokes more to see what their real-world impact might be.
The book is fascinating. It's called Planet Funny: How Comedy Took Over Our Culture. We've been speaking with the book's author, Ken Jennings. Ken, really great talking to you today.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
A very bizarre and disturbing story ended tragically when a toddler was stabbed to death by a Texas man who was the toddler's own father, who yelled, "Jesus is coming," as he was stabbing the toddler. The toddler was 16 months old. A witness explained that during the attack, once again, "Jesus is coming" was being yelled by the dad. This happened in the middle of the day in Lewisville, Texas. No one has been identified as of this morning. The police captain says this was probably the worst incident he's seen in 20 years as a police officer. A neighbor who heard the commotion came out with their gun, fired 3 shots at the dad, fortunately didn't hit the toddler. One did hit the dad in the leg. A woman threw a garbage can at the dad, and ultimately the ending completely tragic as the 16-month-old was brought to the hospital and died there. The dad's been arrested. He was treated for the gunshot wound to the leg. The neighbor who fired the gun is not going to be facing any criminal charges. Now, we don't yet know what charges will be filed against the father, but I think it's safe to assume they're going to be very, very serious. And right away, it's yet another horrible story of a crime in the United States. What I want to talk about is the immediate discussion that started after the incident of evil person versus mentally ill person versus religious nut, right? That is the debate that started around the story. And this is always a tough thing to talk about. And more than likely, almost everyone listening will disagree with me on some level, or maybe even find themselves extraordinarily offended with some of my commentary. But let's go through it piece by piece. First of all, speaking very generally, I think that almost everyone who commits this type of crime, serial murder, gruesome individual murders, terrorism, mass shootings, on some level, there is mental illness. These are not balanced actions. You can argue and say, well, it's mostly evil with some mental illness. But the truth is that most people in most situations are not going to end up killing their kid. And untreated mental illness is a factor, although not necessarily the only factor. Now, there are other people who will hear the story and they'll focus in on the yelling of "Jesus is coming," right? They'll say, listen, the guy was yelling about Jesus. This is a religiously inspired crime. This is a religious nut, and religion made him do it. But we got to think critically about that as well. I'm a top critic of religion. You all know that. Often I am criticized for being too harsh about religion. But I think that simply saying religion made him do it is a little bit too far. Let's sort of hear both sides of that, right? One side would be, well, Christianity includes in its primary sacred text a story of God telling a man to kill his own son, and the man was about to do it. I think that's the story of Abraham, right?
Yeah.
Until God told him, hey, you know what? I was just testing your faith. You don't actually have to kill your son. They tell that story as a beautiful story of God's relationship to his followers and how you can always trust God because ultimately he'll have you do the right thing or whatever. But a dad was about to kill his kid. So there's no shortage of like equally abhorrent behavior in the Christian Bible. But just because the guy yelled Jesus is coming doesn't mean Christianity made him do it any more than, you know, the followers of Jim Jones believed that they should kill their children with cyanide because of the doctrine of Jones. Jones may have put him over the edge, but they were suggestible. They were often traumatized, troubled individuals. And it could be Jim Jones, or it could be Christianity or Islam or Alex Jones' conspiracy theories that pushed them over the edge. But anything could have pushed them over the edge. And of course, most Christians don't kill their kids, regardless of how devout their religious beliefs are. This is not an excuse for the disastrous impact of extreme religious belief in the world. It's not that at all. But what I am telling you is that if this guy had been Muslim, he would have been yelling something in Arabic maybe, and many people would be blaming Islam and saying it's a terrorist attack, even though the religion in this case seems to be an outlet to the insanity, but not actually the cause. And then lastly is the question of drugs. Drugs often a factor. We just don't know in this case. Certainly could be an important causal element. We know that a significant portion of people who commit certain crimes are under the influence of drugs and alcohol at the time that they do it. Doesn't mean that those substances are solely responsible, but the point is, it's not as easy as saying, this is merely a mentally ill person. This is merely a religious nut. Send me your thoughts about how we should consider religion in these stories where it seems more incidental than causal. Google is accused in a lawsuit of tracking the movements of iPhone and Android users even when privacy settings have turned location history off and supposedly don't allow this type of tracking. There is this feature called location history on your phone. You aren't supposed to be physically tracked by Google when you turn that off, and your location history, places you visited, aren't supposed to be stored. There's a new lawsuit against Google which says it's not true. Google is tracking you either way. Class action lawsuit has been filed on behalf of people who turned off, or at least believed that they had turned off, Google's location tracking feature. The lawsuit, which is filed in California, claims that this violates California law. Computer science researchers at Princeton University got involved, and they confirmed that, yes, indeed, tracking was happening even when location history had been turned off. The help section of Google's website now says that turning location history off, quote, does not affect other location services, and that some location data may be saved through other services like search and maps. Is this shocking? The answer is obviously no. What can we do about it? The answer is, I don't know. If the lawsuit gets Google to change the policy, then okay, that might be one step forward. But the truth is, the way that that is written, there are many other ways for Google to follow that by the letter and not in spirit. Let me give you an example. If you turn location services off and you are no longer tracked via GPS, even if you turn off GPS services altogether on your phone, the Wi-Fi you connect to is easy to geolocate for Google, and they would know where you are based on the Wi-Fi networks that you're connecting to. IP scanning, where you, restaurants and places that you look up. There are countless other ways, even with GPS services turned off, never mind location history turned off, that Google can track you. So the question very quickly becomes, Pat, are you switching to MapQuest because of this?
I'm going to have to. I mean, I thought that when I turned off my location history on Friday night, when I go to all the places I like to go to, that I was totally fine, but apparently not. And even incognito mode's not going to help me, too.
But seriously, you're not actually switching to MapQuest.
No, I'm not changing it.
You're not, and I'm not either. And some people will say, well, if you don't take a stand, then this isn't going to get any better. I still think it doesn't really matter because you can be tracked by IP address, not as precisely. You can be tracked in a bunch of other ways. And even if the class action lawsuit is hugely successful, millions and millions of people were impacted by this, and every single one of them is entitled to $15 if they fill out complex class action lawsuit forms and wait 18 months. It's still not going to make a huge difference, and most people aren't even going to do it because the paperwork for these things is extraordinarily onerous. So I am concerned about this. I am not someone who says, if I'm not concerned about them knowing what I'm doing, I shouldn't be concerned about them having more access than I want them to have. I don't fall for that. I think that is a slip. I resist slippery slopes many times. I think that actually is opening the door to a slippery slope. Or I just don't think we can do anything about it.
Or if you're not doing anything wrong, then you have nothing to worry about.
Same
what
thing.
About that one? Same thing?
I am not someone who subscribes to that. And yet, I don't think this is nothing, right? And even I'll go even further. Even if Google, quote, fixes this, even though this is clearly a feature and not a glitch, and this is extraordinarily valuable data, what if there, when you go on your phone and you look at when places are busiest, that is partially based on location history. Sure. And a lot of people find that to be extraordinarily useful. When you look at real-time traffic on Google Maps, that is partially coming from location services and this exact type of thing. Do you want to give all of that up? Maybe the answer is yes. I'm merely playing devil's advocate. I think it's just important when we think about this. This does not excuse for a second what Google has done, and if it's illegal, they should pay the price for it. But a lot of us would prefer the conveniences that come with location services being turned on. That's just the reality.
Yeah, I'm one of those people. Like, I'm not hypersensitive when it comes to my own privacy and security and this type of thing, but I understand that some people are, and some people are wary about giving Google all their information, all their data all the time.
Yep.
And for those people, they should have the right to turn off those services.
I agree. I agree that that's absolutely something they should be able to do. As you could probably tell, I have way more sort of questions in this story than answers, and that's kind of the reality of the entire thing. For some people, this is super binary. I don't want Google tracking me, period. Other people don't care at all, which as I mentioned, have some concerns with. Most people recognize the value that comes from lots of location-related services and apps provided by Google, but we still want to feel like we have some control over our data and how we are being tracked, and this lawsuit makes us feel that, if the allegations are accurate, that we don't have that control. I don't have the answers, I don't have the solution, but I do want you to tell me what you think. We have a voicemail today about universal basic income. Our voicemail number is 2192-DAVID-P. You can call any time of day, whenever you want. I don't mind, it's just the answering machine. And here is a voicemail about my recent interview with Andrew Yang, 2020 Democratic presidential candidate, about UBI.
Hey, David. So I know you had Andrew Yang on not too long ago talking about his UBI plan, but it seems to me, I just don't know that what $12,000 a year would really do for a lot of people. I think it seems like it's great for someone, say, making $20,000 a year at a minimum wage job, right? Because then they go from 20 to 32, and that's a pretty nice bump. But if you're someone who has nothing, like that, obviously $12,000 is better than nothing, but you're still in poverty, right? You're still going to struggle to pay rent. You know, and especially because on Ezra's podcast, Andrew Yang said that his UBI would be opt-in, and if you opt in, then you can no longer get things like food stamps. So it just seems like a lot of people who need it the most are going to end up kind of at a wash.
Yeah. These are all reasonable concerns about universal basic income. Individually, they all have different answers depending on how you configure the system. But I think even for people, you know, the caller said, if you make nothing and you get $12,000, you're still in poverty. Well, yes, but now a $20,000 a year job in addition to the $12,000 does get you $32,000 a year. So I share a lot of these concerns. I just don't think that these are the specific reasons why UBI will or won't work. I think that there's just broader picture issues, which I brought up with Andrew Yang, about negative income taxes versus UBI. Does UBI add on to other social welfare programs, or does it replace it? Every single UBI proposal answers those questions in a slightly different way. Every one of those concerns is legitimate, but I don't think they are actually the biggest questions around universal basic income. We have a great bonus show coming up for you today. Donald Trump now says windmills are bird killers. Technically true, but he overstates the importance of it as he tries to revive the coal industry. I-95, one of the main East Coast highways, is finally done after 60 years, but now you have to start the repairs because a lot of those parts now really need some help. And we will discuss whether Melania Trump is trolling her husband with her entire anti-bullying campaign. DavidPakman.com/membership or Patreon.com/DavidPakmanShow, two places where you can become a supporter of the show and then, as a result, get instant access to the bonus show. I look forward to speaking to you on that members-only bonus show in mere minutes.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.